the end of a long, busy, stressful day. Have you ever found yourself drinking a glass of wine or eating a bowl of ice cream and not really even being aware of when you made the decision to pour that glass of wine or open the freezer, right? You just had an urge and you reacted without thinking. Or maybe you told yourself, I deserve this after the day I've had, right? No questions asked. But neither of these choices actually support your brain health goals. In fact, afterwards, you may be kicking yourself for giving in to the urges. That's what we're going to talk about in this episode. How to deal with your urges so they don't derail your best efforts. I'm going to show you how to spot them and then how to trace what's under them so you actually get to have a say in the decision-making process. In other words, to respond instead of just react. Well, hi there, Amy here. Thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to part 3 of the 3-part series, Name It to Navigate It. So quick recap, in part 1, we talked about affect labeling, the ability to notice and name what you're feeling, okay, and how this simple step can reduce your stress response. Now, I said simple, not easy, right? We all know these are not the same, which is why in part 2, I introduced the wheel of emotions, and we talked about the difference between emotions and feelings and how helpful it is to be able to accurately describe your emotional experiences. Because our emotions give us information. And today, we're going to talk about how best to use that information. Because naming a feeling is useful, right? I like to think of it as knowing where you are on Google Maps, which is essential to figuring out how to get to where you want to go. So, to start, let's talk about the operational definition of an urge. Okay, so an urge is a strong pull to act right now without much thought attached to it. And if you, quote, give in to your urges, it's not a character flaw. And it's not a lack of discipline or willpower. It's your brain doing exactly what it's built to do. It recognized a pattern and it says, I've seen this problem before and I know how to solve it. I got this. And remember the wheel of emotions from the last episode? I talked about how each of the core emotions prepares us for some form of action. And an action tendency is the urge that comes with an emotion. For example, fear may create an urge to escape, avoid, freeze, seek safety, or protect yourself. Anger may create an urge to confront, push back, defend, or set a boundary. Right? Sadness may create an urge to withdraw, to cry, to slow down, to seek comfort, or to reconnect. And then disgust may create an urge to reject or expel or move away. And joy or pride may create an urge to approach, to engage, to celebrate, or share, or continue. Right? So you can see urges aren't bad. In fact, they're extremely useful. And of course, if you're alive and well, you're going to have them. So instead of trying to resist urges, let's embrace them and use them to guide us in taking care of our needs. Okay? And speaking of needs, we also need to talk about your brain's priorities. Number 1 is your survival, with number 2, safety, as a very close second. And then number 3 is energy conservation, right? Because for thousands of years, our brains had to contend with feast and famine because food wasn't found at your local grocery store. Okay, and fun fact, while researching for this episode, I found out the median distance between a McDonald's and a Burger King is 1.34 miles. And as of 2018, the farthest you could ever be from a McDonald's on the contiguous U.S., so the 48 states, was only about 120 miles. So your brain's primary job is not to help you reach your stated goals. Its primary job is to keep you alive, keep you safe, and conserve energy. And it uses rewards to steer you towards behaviors it's learned may accomplish those jobs. Okay, and mind you, reward does not have to mean just pleasure. It can also mean avoiding discomfort. In other words, all human behavior has a payoff. Everything you do. So when you have a glass of wine or bowl of ice cream without even deciding to, your brain isn't malfunctioning, okay? It found a known solution to a problem that it recognized. It's saying, I know how to fix this. No need to spend time thinking about it, right? Even though it may conflict with what you want in the long run. So focusing on the bowl of ice cream at the end of the day, okay? Even though you're not really hungry, you might be feeling lonely or stressed or just bored. So the corresponding urge is for comfort or break or distraction. And that payoff is real, okay? Your brain gives you an actual hit of relief. But here's the catch. It can wind up being like a payday loan, right? Real money in your hand right now, steep interest that you don't feel until later. And later can actually come pretty fast, right? In the form of kicking yourself. We're not just talking about health issues further down the road. And here's what I want you to note. If you do kick yourself, that anger isn't about the ice cream. It's a reaction to an emotion. What do I mean? Well, according to psychologist Leslie Greenberg, we have primary emotions and secondary emotions. So a primary emotion is your most immediate and fundamental emotional response to a situation. Whereas a secondary emotion is a reaction to that first feeling. Okay, not to the situation, to the feeling itself. So a classic example would be feeling angry in response to feeling hurt or frustrated. So back to the kitchen, right? You eat the ice cream or whatever your go-to behavior is when you have this kind of urge. And afterwards, the voice in your head says, I'm so angry at myself. I'm so annoyed. And more than likely, this anger is a secondary emotion. Because if we explore and ask what's underneath it, we might discover that I'm angry with myself becomes I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed becomes I'm afraid I'll never be able to change. And underneath that, there's usually a need. Something like, I need reassurance that one choice, one mistake doesn't erase my progress, right? That's a completely different place to respond from than I'm so angry at myself. So by the time you notice anything, chances are the initial urge has passed. And if your inner critic is alive and well, you may be thinking you'll never be able to stick with the healthy habits to build an Alzheimer's resistant brain. And that's why I recorded this 3-part series for you. Because we're going to use our urges to guide us in taking care of our needs, right? To help identify what they are so that we can take care of them. Which now, if we go back to the kitchen, I want you to see there were actually 2 urges there, not just one. So the first urge is what led to the ice cream, right? Loneliness or exhaustion or boredom, right? Take your pick. And that urge was probably pointing at something real, right? The need for comfort, rest, company, connection. So the ice cream does help for a minute, but not for long. Okay? The second urge then shows up afterwards. And it's not about the ice cream anymore, right? It's about the fact that you ate it. And the urge I'm talking about is the urge to rehash it, to let the anger turn into, why do I keep doing this? I have no self-control, right? That urge may feel productive, like accountability, but it isn't. It's self-criticism, right? Wearing a motivation disguise. And here's the sneaky payoff. It helps you avoid the discomfort of change. So 2 urges and 2 different needs hiding underneath them, right? Under the first, again, comfort or rest or something to do or company, right? And now that you understand the need, you can see why ice cream is only a temporary Band-Aid, right? Because ice cream doesn't really help loneliness. Connection does. And eating isn't rest. And it may give you something to do if you're bored, but it's really not the kind of mental stimulation your brain actually craves. And then under the second urge, we already traced it. Anger to disappointed to afraid I'll never change. And then underneath all of that, I need reassurance that one choice doesn't erase all my progress. Right? That second urge is the one most people never learn to watch for. The urge to punish yourself, which in many ways is about keeping you safe by avoiding the uncertainty of change. And then there's also a third category of emotional response called instrumental emotion. And it's used to influence another person or to produce a desired outcome. So this would include things like displaying anger so others will stop questioning you, or appearing helpless so someone else will take over. Right? So I'm going to save this third type for another episode. But if that kind of behavior is something you're dealing with and you'd like some help, let me know in the comments below or email me, because it'll tell me if I should record an episode about this sooner rather than later. All right? So now, going back to the urge, right? The urge tells you what might make the discomfort go away for 5 minutes. The need points at what might truly address the situation. So again, your urges aren't the enemy. An urge is information. It's telling you the emotion is active and a familiar loop is about to start. And it doesn't have to be a command. Okay, so going back to part 1, see if you can notice what's happening in your body. Like a knock at the door. Okay, you can hear the knock without opening the door immediately. Right? Who's there? What are they bringing? Do I actually want to let this in right now? And then also from part 1, we talked about naming the emotion. And I want to point out there was also a small language pattern that can help create space, right? The pause that I'm always talking about. And that language pattern was, instead of saying, I'm anxious, try saying, I feel anxious. So I know it sounds like a small difference, but look at how powerful language is. I am anxious. You've become the emotion. There's no space between you and it. I feel anxious. Now there's a you having an experience. You're not the anxiety, you're the one noticing it. So I am anxious is like being pulled under a wave, right? I feel anxious can be like standing on the shore watching it come in, okay? It's still real, it's still powerful, but you're not inside it. And it's that space that lets you treat the urge like the knock at the door, instead of the door already being wide open, right? And that's really the key to reacting versus responding, right? The thing I promised you at the beginning. So, in the first 2 episodes, we walk through the first 4 steps of what I call the learning cycle, or TLC for short, right? We talked about situation, thoughts or beliefs, interpretation, emotion or feelings. 4 of the 7 steps. Today, we take the next 2. Step 5 is choice. Step 6 is action. And this is exactly where urge versus need comes in. Because an urge tries to skip both steps. It hands you a choice that's already made and an action already in motion, before you even get a chance to cast a vote. The urge says, let's go. Real choice says, let me think about it. So remember, an urge is an action tendency, built in, automatic, and fast. And choice is what happens when you interrupt the tendency before it turns into the action. So real choice means pausing long enough to ask what the need actually calls for. Okay, not what the urge is grabbing for. So if the urge feels strong, okay, and you really want to act, try telling yourself you can still choose whatever that action is in 10 minutes. You're not forbidding it. You're just buying time to think. Okay, delay creates choice. But restriction tends to create rebellion. And as any Star Trek fan knows, resistance is futile. And back to the wheel of emotions, your ability to name the experience you're having helps you understand your actual needs. So choosing the action is figuring out how best to take care of your needs. Okay, again, think about Google Maps. You need to know where you are in order to get directions for where you want to go, right? And if you find yourself in terrain that's mountainous, you know what kind of gear you need, right? Emotion and need, and the actions you want to take. Alrighty? So there you have it. 3 episodes. In part 1, you learn to notice and name, right? To catch that feeling before it gets a chance to run the show. In part 2, we talked about naming it, getting more accurate and more focused about which emotion it actually was, right? How to better describe your emotional experience. And then today, in this episode, you learned the difference between what an urge wants and what you actually need. So, if you want my worksheet that steps you through all the steps on one page, okay, that's the Practice TLC Worksheet. And you can get it for free at moxie-club.com/TLC. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can use the QR code here, right? And if you want the book behind all of that, that's Thoughts Are Habits 2 at thoughtsarehabits2.com. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, here's the QR code. All right. So either one is a great next step. So just choose the one that feels the easiest right now. Okay. So you'll actually do it. As in use the worksheet or read the book. Okay. And of course, if you would like some coaching to help you build an Alzheimer's resistant brain, that's what my program, Sharp for Life, is all about. So to learn more about that, just go to amylangcoaching.com/stay sharp. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, here's the QR code that will take you there. Alrighty. So I'm going to wrap up this episode and the series with a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die. And the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility.